Um, I'm trying to merge little technologies here. So I got my iPad stylus and I have the media ethics textbook, right? So let's sort of begin. So after, significant notions of ethical theory have been done, right? I want to kind of pay attention to some themes that are actually inside the information ethics book, right? Obviously, we don't have a PDF, and I'll be quoting from the 10th edition, right? But there are some interesting philosophical claims that need to be paid attention to. All right. And so the one thing that I sort of want to pay attention to with you today is to talk a little bit about. Let me go back. Talk to you a little bit about Plato's cave, as it were. Now, Plato's cave is a figurative metaphor, lesson, and analogy, and it has had a great deal of effect on how we might conceive of truth or how we might conceive of information. And so, what I'll also do is I'll also share my screen and kind of find some pretty good pictures, right? But in basically, there is a divided line in Plato, right? Sometimes this is called the divided line. It's actually not appearing on the screen. Maybe it is in the recording. Well, we'll have to see, right? Or do I have to select this and just do this here? Oh, damn. So there's something called the divided line, right? Now, the divided line in Plato has to do with where opinion and knowledge diverge. And that might be a kind of a strange thing to say to mass media people who might necessarily be used to the fact that maybe all of it's opinion, right? But at least within philosophy, right, we had a few interesting things about Plato's cave. So let me sort of show you that there's this divided line. And on this divided line, we have we have what we might say knowledge up here, right? So we have knowledge right there. But we also have down below opinion, right? So there's a difference in and the knowledge versus opinion is not the same as opinion versus fact. Now, opinion versus fact is something that's intuitive, and it's probably pretty heavily in your communication courses. But since the media ethics course is borrowing and reflecting upon what it is to be a mass media professional with inside information ethics in chapter 2, there is this huge divide between knowledge as well as opinion. Now, opinion has an association with knowledge through the senses. You're going to be like, what? I know, right? Knowledge through the senses is opinion, and that's less developed knowledge, right? So for the ancient Greek mind, and this is true in Aristotle as it's true in Plato, right? But the world of appearance wasn't the really real world. The really real world was the world that engaged ideas. It was the mental world of concepts and ideas. That's the most real world, right? We might say that the ideal or the conceptual is the most real for Plato. And that sort of needs to be understood because basically what Plato will do is he'll give a spatialized metaphor for on the very bottom where those people are. And I'm going to show you some pictures, right? But just to kind of draw it out, right? So there's a distinction between knowledge and knowledge, the most true things that we could say about the world, right, are ideas. The abstract ideas. So the conceptual idea of justice on a conceptual level is more true than how it actually appears in the world. But, and here's the most important thing about Plato's notion of the cave that has indeed been a metaphor for a lot of people. It's been, how do I want to say this, right? It's been such a driven metaphor that people have been convinced for a long time that the abstract ideas like justice, beauty, truth, those like big, highfalutin kind of concepts, they're the most real and they're instantiations in the world. The reason why we understand, for instance, so let's go down a little bit, right? Say you have friend one. I'll just do F1 for friend one, right? And friend one is loyal, and I'm just going to use the word steadfast. I know it's kind of a strange word, but someone who's steadfast is loyal, and in times of emotional turmoil, they're just by your side. They're just steady. They're sturdy, right? And it's really like, and then, so let's say you have F2, which is friend two, right? Now, friend two, only your friend when it suits them. So you got two friends, right? Now, rather than say that the value judgment is who's the better friend is just culturally relative, what the Platonist is the adjectival form of people who believe in Plato's notion of the cave. But friend one participates in the most ideal form of friendship. Like, so the big concept friendshipness, assume there is an objectively true, abstract, general idea of friendship for this to make any sense. But when you see friend one participating in the form of friendship, or the basic idea of friendship, right, he participates in it better than friend two, who really is only your friend. You met him your freshman year, you were 21 first, and so he's like, hey, can you buy me some beer? He's only around when you have a car on campus. He's only your friend insofar as you take him places, right? And that person is kind of using you, that, but that person isn't participating in the idea of friendship as much as friend one. So these general abstract ideas for Plato, including the notion of truth, which is very germane to like chapter 2, right? So let's actually go, and I'm going to find you the best video. And this is, I don't know, I watched this video a long time ago, but it is absolutely the best video of all time. So let me go here. I'm not sharing my screen yet because I need to find that. So YouTube. Now I should have this up beforehand, but just deal with me for a second, right? I have searched for it so many times. All right, so now this is an old video. It's kind of a rite of passage for anyone who takes my philosophy class, right? Because I saw this video years ago. And so let me go to share my screen. Click here. I just talk my way through these things, right? And then click here. And we'll watch this together.
Let me show in a parable to what extent our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Envision human figures living in an underground cave with a long entrance across the whole width of the cave. Here they have been from their childhood and have their legs and necks chained so that they cannot move and can only see before them, being prevented by the chains from turning their heads around. Above and behind them, a fire is blazing at a distance. They see only their own shadows, which the fire throws on the opposite wall of the cave. For how could they see anything but the shadows? if they were never allowed to move their heads. Between the fire and the prisoners, there is a raised way and a low wall built along the way like the screen which puppet players have in front of them, over which they show the puppets. Do you see men passing along the wall, carrying all sorts of articles which they hold projected above the wall? Statues of men and animals made of wood and stone and various materials? Of the objects which are being carried in like manner, they would only see the shadows. And if they were able to converse with one another, would they not suppose that they were naming what was actually before them? And suppose further that there was an echo which came from the wall. Would they not be sure to think, when one of the passers-by spoke, that the voice came from the passing shadows? To them, the truth would be literally nothing but the shadows of the images. And now look again and see what will naturally follow if one of the prisoners is released. At first, when he is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his head round and look towards the light, all this would hurt him, and he would be much too dazzled to see distinctly those things whose shadows he had seen before. And then conceive someone saying to him that what he saw before was an illusion. But that now, when he's approaching nearer to reality and his eyes turn toward more real existence, he has a clearer vision. What will be his reply? And you may further imagine that his instructor is pointing to the objects as they pass and requiring him to name them. Will he not be perplexed? Will he not think that the shadows which he formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown to him? And suppose once more that he is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent and held fast until he is forced into the presence of the sun himself. When he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled, and he will not be able to see anything at all of what are now called realities. He will require to grow accustomed to the sight of the upper world. And first he will see the shadows best. Next, the reflections of objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. Then he will gaze upon the stars and the spangled heavens and the light of the moon. He will see the sky and the stars by night. Last of all, he will be able to see the sun, and not mere reflections of it in the water, but he will see the sun in its own proper place and not in another. And he will contemplate the sun as it is. Will he not then proceed to argue that it is the sun who gives the season and the years, and is the guardian of all that is in the visible world, and in a certain way the cause of all things which his fellows have been accustomed to behold? Clearly he would first see the sun, and then reason about it. And when he remembered his old habitation and what was the wisdom of the cave and his fellow prisoners, do you not suppose that he would bless himself for the change and pity them? And if they were in the habit of conferring honors among themselves on those who were the quickest to observe the passing shadows, and to remark which of them went before and which followed after, and which were together and who were therefore best able to draw conclusions as to the future, do you think that he would care for such honors and glories, or envy the possessors of them. Would he not say with Homer, better to be the poor servant of a poor master, and to endure anything rather than think as they do and live after their manner? Imagine once more such a one coming suddenly out of the sun to be replaced in his old situation. Would he not be certain to have his eyes full of darkness? And if there were a contest of measuring the shadows, and he had to compete with the prisoners who had never moved out of the den, while his sight was still weak and before his eyes had become steady, wouldn't they all laugh at him and say he had spoiled his eyesight by going up there? That it was better not to even think of ascending? And if anyone tried to release another and lead him up to the light, let them only catch the offender, and they would put him to death. It is the task of the enlightened not only to ascend to learning and to see the good, but to be willing to descend again to those prisoners and to share their troubles and their honors, whether they are worth having or not. And this they must do, even with the prospect of death. They should give of their help to one another, wherever each class is able to help the community.
Okay, so that's a lovely movie. And let me go back. I'll stop sharing my screen. But so that is in a nutshell, that's actually Plato's Cave. And so on page 30 of our media ethics textbook, right, they say, well, the ancient Greeks tied truth to memory. Plato was the first to link truth to human rationality and intellect. In the Republic, Plato equated truth with a world of pure form, like when he goes out towards the sun, right? A world to which human beings had only indirect access. In Plato's vision, there was an ideal notion of a chair, like chairness, right? But that ideal chair did not exist in reality. That's actually, it exists in degrees. It's actually kind of a misnomer, actually. And so, as the philosophy professor reading when the common professors actually do philosophy, sometimes it's pretty bad. Just gonna put it out there. Anyway, so I have a chair in the other room. The cats have kind of scratched it, right? And it's kind of broken in a little bit. It's not like it was when I first got it, right? And if I were to buy a new chair, maybe it would participate more in chairness than others. But chairness is itself a concept of a universal idea that everyone has access to. And that's the thing that, at least Plato's notion of truth, that kind of strikes us. And it's an inversion, right? Because we are all taught in grade school that, science is the best way to know reality. And what is science doing? Science isn't using reason or concept as much as basing knowledge off the senses. So it uses knowledge from observation. And so what has become more important to us in the 21st century has become the visible, right? So, but for Plato inverted that. Right? He thought mere contemplation of an idea was more real than the actual images, right? So the truth of the shadows is dogma, right? So this comes from the Greek word dokomoi, which means it seems to me. So the dokomoi, or dogma as it might be, which is the Greek word for opinion, right, is how the world appears to us. And the appearances can be deceiving, right? So think about when you stick a stick in the water and it's kind of bent a little bit, right? That bented image is a distortion of how things are not necessarily true. So I do have a few pictures, right? So let me just show you, and I'm just going to do like the very beginning. Like this is just a beginning lecture, kind of like on Plato. I'll do more as we go forward. Right. But I just kind of wanted to show you that video. I was shown it when I was 19. And actually, the professor brought in like the reel, like it was on like I don't know if you've ever seen like movie reels of like they're just film, right? And so we put it on the projector, and that was before the internet, but now it's obviously on YouTube, right? So, but that gives you a sense without reading Plato's Republic as to what Plato was talking about, right? This tension between, and the idea here is that learned people, even if they suffer at the hands of the people who don't know any better, that live in the shadow or the illusions of the world, right? They still need to go and help people who are in ignorance or in darkness or in shadow. So shadow and ignorance and darkness become metaphors for humans' lack of knowledge, right? And then the sunlight, right? Enlightenment, right? The light becomes more associated with knowledge, right? I often say right, question mark, as my filler. So let me go over here and find you the image that I want to find, Plato's Republic. I just want to kind of show you. I think this is a funnier one. Plato's Republic News Cave. I should probably bring it up. Look over the images, right? So that's not, yeah, some of these are pretty good. But a lot of them actually. Actually, this is an updated one, but kind of, I think it drives home the point. All right. So take a look. Some artists did this. I actually like this, right? Because you've seen the cave, and we'll talk about a little bit more about it. But let me go to share my screen. I think this is what Plato would think today. Like, so let me go to my browser. Right. So Plato would think this. I think this is pretty interesting, right? Where the media and the hubbub is taking place. I think might have a very skeptical view. That these are the shadows on the wall that are being presented. Um, and maybe there's a little bit of playing with like legacy journalism is the discerning of facts of what is beneath the appearance of things. Whereas, oftentimes you might see stories like um, I saw a story that really wasn't a news story, right? So apparently, I read a story about how Brandon Fraser's comeback from like the 90s, like he's now in a few roles now, has been largely fueled by Twitter. And a lot of women had crushes when they were the Mommy Returns, right? They had crushes on the actors that were in that movie. It wasn't a very good movie, right? And then Brendan Fraser is a nice guy. He's kind of vulnerable, and so maybe women kind of like that. So, but it was a news story about gossip about people on TikTok, right? It wasn't really a true news story, and it was just a kind of news story that sort of took place in the appearances of the world, right? Let's actually go back and I'll show you. Uh, so here's some other ones. So I like a classic one, right? Let's go here. Here's another one. That's not what I wanted, right? But we can just sort of go here. And you kind of see, but like human ignorance is taking place right here, right? And then out towards the light, right? So one of the things that you can think about, if you've seen The Matrix, right? The Matrix, the people inside the Matrix that are trapped, literally trapped with their heads towards the wall, when what is real is only what they're told, right? And then there's some agents of the Matrix that are kind of like right here, right? And uh, sorry, gotta let the cat out. And then of course, as they ascend out, that's knowledge right there. So truth is the conceptual or the ideal, at least here, right? So some other versions of Plato's cave, right? They all pretty much the same. Like it's kind of like, but basically it's about the education of the soul and ascending by the use of our intellect to grasp reality in its light rather than being in shadow or ignorance. But the interesting thing here is that opinion is the realm of shadow, and sensory knowledge is the realm of shadow as well. And the truly real or the true truth has to do with beholding the absolutely conceptual forms of thought, right? So let's go back to the whiteboard that we have open over here, right? I don't think I have it open anymore. Go to more, down all the way here. I'll get used to these controls once again, right? But the word eidos, E-I-D-O-S, right, is the Greek root of the word idea in English, right? So idea, the ideas are most true. That what makes Plato a very interesting philosopher is that the conceptual takes metaphysical priority as to what's most real versus the shadow of opinion. Now, I don't necessarily know if mass media actually occurs in Plato's shadow realm. I mean, that's a subject of a lot of interpretation, maybe, but it's one of the more interesting things that have been inside chapter 2. And of course, I'll have some more videos and I'll post more content for chapter 2. But I actually just wanted to make this video because I wanted to show you the old George Orwell narrated animated version. I think it's just everyone's induction into philosophy has to see this video at least once. And because we're talking about Plato and the metaphor as to how that kind of just how that has affected the history of truth. So obviously there's a lot more about the philosophical background of truth, but I only like to make videos that are like a half hour long. So obviously, right? Okay, so yeah. So when you get to chapter 2, obviously, right? That's just one of the many really cool things inside chapter 2. Even if I don't like Wilkins, Painter, and Patterson's interpretation of Republic, kind of irresponsible to say. What did they say again? They said a world of pure form, a world to which human beings only had indirect access. In Plato's vision, there was an ideal notion of a chair, but that ideal chair did not exist in reality. That's kind of fair, but like some chairs participate in the ideal form better than others, right? That's why you know what a good chair is, because it's the type of thing that participates in the perfect form of it. But Plato believed in these perfect ideas. There was a perfect ideal world. And then this world kind of, the sensible things participate in the ideal insofar as they participate in their sort of like their metaphysical nature, right? So what people thought of a chair was as similar to the ideal chair as the shadows on the wall of the cave are to objects illuminated by the fire. To Plato, truth was knowable only to human intellect. It could not be touched or verified. That's actually pretty good. We're living in the cave. Plato's metaphor of the cave has had a profound influence on Western thought. Not only did Plato link truth to rationality as opposed to human experience, but his work implies that truth is something that can be captured only through the intellect. Platonic truth, right? Is implicit within a thing itself. Truth defined the perfect form. Plato's concept of truth separated the concept from the external world in which the physical objects exist. And that's actually kind of true, right? It was a separation, but the physical objects participate in the form, right? So they participate in the most ideal form of reality because that form of reality is here. It's influencing this world, right? Obviously, maybe you could see a little bit of connection to like Christian theology. There is a sort of Platonist influence that develops within Christian philosophy, but that's very far afield from media ethics. Okay, so I'll make more videos. I just thought it was interesting, and I wanted to point you in that direction.